Mobile Suit Gundam. As a franchise that dates back to 1979, the history of Gundam video games is about as long as the history of video games as we know them. And I feel like they've mostly always been interesting 7 out of 10s. I haven't played many of them that have truly wowed me, but almost every one of them has something fascinating about it. There's Gundam Breaker fulfilling the Gunpla Battle fantasy, SD Gundam G Generation's tactical RPG mixed with mech collecting, Zeonic Front's more tactical take on mobile suit combat, and plenty of others. Of course, including GBO2 for those who have been with the channel for a while. And of course, the PlayStation 2, as it was for many things in video games, was a particular golden age for Gundam games. There's a lot I could talk about, with Journey to Jaburo and Zeonic Front being probably 2 of the most popular ones. There were enough Gundam games on PS2 to fill a space colony. But with all that said, we are, I guess, mostly an RPG channel here. Those seem to just be the videos people watch. So we're going to focus on the surprisingly solid Gundam RPG, MS Saga: A New Dawn. Yeah, even that title's not exactly promising, huh? The Japanese title is Gundam True Odyssey Ushina Wareta Ji no Densetsu. I can definitely see the lack of the word Gundam in the English title, making it easy to overlook. I really only found out about this game due to randomly stumbling across it on TV tropes one day. More recently, I have seen like one video recommended to me on YouTube that talks about it, and I'm sure there are probably others, but it doesn't seem to be one of the better known ones regardless. And when I did stumble across it, I did try it on a whim, and it was surprisingly good. Enough that, at the time at least, I overlooked its flaws. Although, replaying it for this video, yeah, it definitely has some glaring flaws. Enough to often overshadow the good parts. Yet when the game's best parts are on display, the game is brilliant, and I often found myself getting carried away playing it. And so, since I have a YouTube channel now, or to be more precise, I now have a YouTube channel that people actually occasionally watch, why not make a video out of this? After all, this game does have some ideas that I haven't seen anywhere else, and it is April, the perfect month to do a Gundam video, since that's when the franchise anniversary is. Which I'm sure will be the start of an enduring format and not something I drop after only one try. You know, like every other format I've tried that isn't my Phantasy Star retrospectives. I'll definitely do another one of these next year, guys, I promise. Starting with the gameplay, the base is mostly standard RPG stuff. Turn-based battles between your party and the enemy with a pool of not MP that you can use for various special techniques. But like many of my favorite RPGs, it proves you don't need to reinvent the wheel or fear turn-based combat. You just need the right additions to make it shine. And here the main addition is the energy system. Each character in your party gains 2 energy per turn, and when you attack you choose one of your mobile suit's equipped weapons to use. Weapons that use more energy will generally deal more damage than others found around the same point in the game, but 1 energy weapons let you slowly build up energy while still attacking. You can even use unarmed attacks that consume 0 energy, but they're weaker without a proper setup, making unarmed builds mostly focused around their boost attacks. And said boost attacks are basically limit breaks you can use if you have enough energy. Their energy costs are much higher, with the cheapest boost attacks being 4 energy, and some of them even requiring the cap of 10 energy. But boost attacks, as should be the case with good special moves, are pretty varied, and which ones a character gets tends to be one of their most defining features and the biggest influence on how you'll build their mobile suits, as most boost attacks will generally depend on having certain types or combinations of weapons equipped. As for other actions in combat, defending consumes no energy, or you can spend a turn charging to gain an extra point of energy, which are both valuable if you need to build up quickly. It also means that spending turns defending against big incoming attacks don't really feel like they're a waste because you're still gaining momentum. And then most other actions like using items or techniques, the aforementioned not magic, will consume 1 energy as well. And the energy system does also constrain opponents, though that said, the enemy does cheat at the energy system a fair bit. But together, the energy system gives the battle a nice ebb and flow, as well as giving you one more thing to juggle in your decision-making process. Aside from the energy system, you can also see some info on the enemy's actions in the next round and plan accordingly. Just the general category, melee, range, boost, technique, or miscellaneous. It may seem like it's not enough, but it will be enough to let you make informed decisions and add to the sense of ebb and flow of the battle. It's a huge plus to be able to know when you have a good window to heal or revive, when an enemy is using a miscellaneous action and you can go all out with melee, or when they're using a big boost attack, so you might need to rotate out your damaged party members and defend. After all, most RPGs just have you picking an action and praying the enemy AI doesn't totally screw you. So being able to play a little more reactively is a good mark in the game's favor. Additionally, once your party grows beyond 3 characters, you get a rear guard which you can swap characters in and out of at any time during battle. And what's nice is that they're not just bench warmers that you can theoretically call in. Characters in the back row gradually recover hit points and gain 1 energy each turn, so switching out a frontliner if they're damaged can allow them to eventually make a comeback, and since switching out units doesn't take an action, you're encouraged to switch offensively when your rearguard units have enough energy in order to keep the pressure up. The way you manage your party is absolutely another highlight, and it does mean that you really do feel like you have the full 6 to fight with, not just the 3 on the field at a time. And switching characters in and out is surprisingly strategic. And the game does a good job of making you use all these systems too. Once it gets going, random encounters often have actual strategies, which I feel like is a low bar, and yet so few RPGs actually do that. Etrian Odyssey is the only one that really comes to mind off the top of my head. But of course, the random encounters are not the highlight. That would be, as it often is, the boss fights. In a boss fight, managing energy between healing regular attacks and saving up for big damage boost attacks becomes far more important considering the endurance element that comes into play. Because of the danger bosses pose, it's a lot more important to pay attention to upcoming actions, with an upcoming boost attack basically demanding a defensive response, while a non-attacking turn can be a vital chance to rotate damaged characters back to the front line and heal them up. Similarly, the switching comes into full play because you will need to use your whole party, and the battle will go on long enough that you'll have opportunities to make some offensive switches with your back row. And yet, I also find that the difficulty of the fights tends to be immaculately balanced. You do need to learn the patterns to survive, but it's all balanced such that you have just enough slack that you can go in blind and learn their patterns as you fight them. If you get a game over, it's probably because you screwed up, not because the boss blindsided you with some bullshit you would have had to know about ahead of time. Though unfortunately, bosses do tend to be immune to most status effects, so this limits a lot of the value you can get from anything in this game that inflicts them. A real shame when status effects can be so painful when used on you, and when everything else in the combat is so excellent. Though I will also say that the battles themselves are presented in a rather plain fashion. I do want to emphasize that this is a late PS2 game. At a time when most devs should be pushing the system, the battles in this game are less lively than some DS RPGs I've played. Part of this is probably just a result of the customization. They need to have animations that work for every possible combination of parts. But the result is that animations, even for boost attacks, tend to feel more like smashing action figures together. And at the same time, the animations are a bit slow and unskippable, which causes fights to drag a little and is the first sign of pacing issues that will become a recurring talking point here. But nonetheless, combat is the strongest part of this game. I consider the sign of a good turn-based RPG to be when I constantly feel like I'm engaged with making decisions, not just mashing through menus, and Gundam True Odyssey nails it. Sometimes it does great, like any RPG with random encounters that can become tedious, and the encounter rate is often a little high. Plus, sometimes the game pulls a few dirty tricks on you. The kamikaze ravens are just mean, and getting ambushed by 2 of them is practically a guaranteed trip to the title screen. But regardless of that, the quality still saves it. A lesser combat system would wear out its welcome far more quickly, but instead the combat shines brightly enough that it was constantly able to keep me hooked. As for systems and customization, well, first we have to talk about the grid equipment system. I would love a more expanded version of this system in some other mecha RPG, or heck, just another mecha game in general. How it works is that instead of simple slots to equip weapons and shields, you get a grid. This ranges from a 4x4 grid on your starting gym to the 8x8 grid of the endgame new Gundam. It's fun to figure out how to cram things on, even if it takes a little bit of time, and it also helps to add a bit more emphasis to the specializations of each mobile suit. Melee weapons are more vertically oriented, while ranged weapons are more horizontally oriented, and most mobile suits will have a grid that is taller or wider depending on which type of combat the suit specializes in. This all starts simple, with it usually being pretty feasible to slap on the few things you'll need in the early game, but as you progress things start getting more interesting. The first sign of this is with high-power weapons like the Zamel Cannon or Impact Lance that are vastly stronger than anything else at the time, but these require using a gun cannon or Gyan respectively to mount them, and take up so much space that you barely have room for anything else. By the time you get other suits that can use these weapons without compromise, power creep is starting to catch up to them, and they're mostly just large and unwieldy. But if you capitalize on them while they're available, they're a huge asset. Meanwhile, many mid and late game boost attacks reward having a well-armed and varied mobile suit by allowing you to fire off all weapons of certain types, which gives you reason to choose carefully which weapons you combine, and weighing the value of shields or certain weapon integrated parts. Although this mostly applies to ranged attackers, unfortunately the system just isn't as interesting for melee fighters until you get the boost attacks that fire ranged weapons and deliver a melee attack, and those are only at the very end game. For the most part, melee boost attacks only care about which category of melee weapon you have equipped. There's sabers, axes, and lances, plus unarmed strikes, each with their own selection of boost attacks, but you can only equip one at a time, compared to the armory of ranged weapons you can equip at once, and the much greater degree of nuance around equip slot and energy costs that ranged weapons have. As for the mobile suits themselves, they feel sufficiently hard to get, but as a result they are rewarding. Generally, they require you to acquire or buy a bunch of data, then expend a rare item at one of these sci-fi 3D printers to manufacture the suit. From there, you can further customize it, swapping out the arms, shoulders, and legs with other parts, either swapped from other suits you've made or acquired on their own. And of course, this is Gundam, so some mobile suit parts have built-in weapons. The correct arms or base mobile suit can give you more weapons to fire off without using any space in your equipment grid. While outside of a few particular early game options these are rarely the strongest choices, they are good for powering up boost attacks that fire all of your weapons by cramming on more while saving space. And the parts are well designed, there's usually trade-offs to consider. Typically better parts are heavier and lower your speed, or parts will specialize towards melee or ranged combat. Plus, there are 4 option part slots. Though some parts do take up multiple, these basically are accessories and offer some of the more interesting trade-offs as you get into the late game, forcing you to balance status protection, extra energy, power boosts, and other effects. It's not too surprising. RPGs that use them well pretty commonly end up with accessories as the most interesting part of the equip screen. Final Fantasy VI comes to mind as a particularly classic example of this. And the last bit of customization is cosmetic. Being a good mecha game, you can of course give your mobile suits a custom paint job. Every mech game with any amount of customization needs this, especially something like Gundam, a franchise that heavily leans on distinctive colors for mobile suits, such as most famously the red-painted mobile suits piloted by Char and his various clones. Though with all this in mind, for a good chunk of the game, customization feels pretty limited by the money you have. I don't mind not having the money for everything, but it often feels like you're stretched just a little too thin compared to the pace of upgrades, to the point where it can often feel like a waste to invest in new stuff at the wrong time. Thus, once again, pacing is the most frequent issue with progression. There's one point in the game, I think, where you get 2 new towns with new equipment in a row without anything except a brief overworld walk in between them. Or then in the mid to late game, there's a very long stretch without any new shops. Plus, parts and mobile suits are not paced as well once you get out of the 1 Year War era stuff. During the first 20 hours or so where you are just getting 1 Year War stuff, it's a nice gradual escalation as you get to work through most of the iconic mobile suits before ending with you getting the Gundam itself, and optionally, my favorite, the Kampfer. But then the Zeta era suits are mostly sped through. You get the biggest 3 for free in short succession, making the optional ones feel rather unnecessary and quite easy to skip over. And then in the end game you get double Zeta suits, either just handed to you like the double Zeta itself, or acquired from one shop hidden well out of the way. And at this time you start seeing a lot of non-Universal Century stuff as optional side content rewards. And then the Char's counterattack stuff is really just the new Gundam and the Sazabi as 2 endgame suits. This all ends up feeling like they crammed in and rushed through a little too much just so that you can end with getting the new Gundam. Which, I love the new Gundam, but I would have preferred a more narrow focus if it gave a better feel to the progression. Something that continues to progress smoothly from the 1 Year War period of the game. Lastly, the actual pilots don't have any room for customization, but rather they serve as the catalyst for most of the choices you make when customizing their mobile suits. Characters are sharply differentiated by their stats, boost abilities, and techniques as they level up. Pretty standard, but it's enough to encourage the customization. So while the customization is far from perfect, there is still enjoyment to be had in creating these mashup mobile suits that can become iconic to your playthrough, giving each character their own unique upgrade path. It's not quite up there with the mechanical satisfaction of the combat, but it does nicely deliver on an important part of the mecha fantasy. Unfortunately, this is where the predominantly positive parts of the review end. One of the game's biggest issues is one of, frankly, my 3 big pillars of RPG design, which is exploration. The exploration in this game feels tedious. The overworld is big and empty, with few opportunities to find anything by exploring, at least until you got the airship. Best emphasized by how Africa contains 1 town and 1 dungeon when you first visit it. It's quite a trek from one to the other, and there's just nothing to find along the way or by going out of your way. Nostalgia might have had a map that feels quite barren as a result of its decision to base its world on the real world, but at least that game filled out its world map with secrets to discover. This game has nothing, and this is consistently the case. Looking around only gets you into random encounters. Prior to getting the airship, there's only one real opportunity to explore and find something new that isn't just you going to an area 1 or 2 story events early. And yet you will almost certainly end up taking a few wrong turns because your map doesn't show mountains that block your path. So even though there's basically nothing to be found off the beaten path, you still have to go through a bit of trial and error in order to find your way forward. And it barely improves in dungeons. They don't have puzzles, mechanics, or interesting layouts, and they're generally just a series of long, branching hallways with one right route and a bunch of dead ends with treasure in them that makes cleaning them out feel like a checklist. Sometimes you'll find a door locked by a switch, which weirdly often is just right next to the door. And the oops, all hallways design makes it feel like you just have to walk a little further than you should, and that everything is just a little bit empty. Plus the encounter rate is just a little bit high, and on your first time through a dungeon you'll have to deal with a lot of fixed encounters. The combat is good, and these fixed encounters are just the right amount of challenge, but because these mandatory battles are just that little bit more challenging, they also take longer. So going through a dungeon the first time tends to take a while just because of the constant fights, and even once you get leveled up a little and the battles become less threatening or even trivial, they do still slow you down. And the worst part, if you end up worn down and having to retreat out of a dungeon, well, the escape and quick travel techniques that your protagonist learns early on means it will be easy to get out, but it sure will be a long walk back through the overworld and the dungeon hallways. This gets especially tedious during some of the end game stuff, since at this point everything is brutal, so you're likely to have to retreat more often, and the walk back is way longer than it should be. And while the early dungeons are quite linear in their arrangement of their hallways, the latter ones just become mazes. They're not any more interesting, and the hallways are just as long and winding as ever, so later dungeons are just even more walking. And this, combined with the game getting harder, means that again, you're more likely to run low on TP and have to retreat, recover, and go through everything all over again. Though at least the mandatory fights do not respawn, so it will be quicker, but only compared to how drawn out a first trip through a dungeon can be. So yeah, the dungeon designs definitely commit a common RPG sin where the game gets bigger and harder, but it doesn't become deeper or more engaging to match. It's just slower and more annoying. And look, this is all coming from a guy who is normally very patient with random encounters and backtracking and the like. If you want to understand where I'm at, I consider the way that the DS-era Etrian Odyssey games make you run through the early floors of your current stratum on every dungeon trip to be a good thing, for how it lets you meaningfully experience your growth and power as you level up. So while my tolerance for tedium is still less than some people's, like hardcore MMO players, I'm still probably above average in my tolerance for this stuff. So if you're the kind of person who does frequently complain about these kinds of things, especially the random encounters, yeah, this game might be a little rough on you. The one mercy is, as mentioned, you do get fast travel pretty early on, letting you instantly travel to any city you've been through on the overworld and letting you instantly escape any dungeon. Honestly, though, the exploration here is just not great. Which really stings for me because one of my favorite parts of RPGs tends to be the sense of adventure you have from large-scale RPGs, or the intimate familiarity you can build up with a location in a more small-scale RPG. Here you have a world primed for adventure, but until you get the airship, the overworld has next to nothing to be found outside of the shortest route to your next destination. And dungeons are all just a series of hallways and fights. Heck, even once you get the airship, most of the things you can explore to find are more tedious dungeons, or a tedious arena where enemies have massively inflated health pools. So the world, whether it's the overworld or a dungeon, is empty. It's a largely blank space between you and your destination. Really, it's this game's greatest source of tedium and pacing issues dragging the whole thing down. So what else is there to highlight in this game? Well, there's the story, I guess. It's really not worthy of its own section. It's pretty generic RPG stuff, honestly. Aside from the incidental existence of mobile suits, there just really isn't much Gundam stuff in the plot. Certainly no tragic coming-of-age story about how war is hell and how humans constantly do things that hurt each other and make the world a worse place. Instead, it's just your typical RPG stuff. Boy goes out to get revenge for the destruction of the orphanage he grew up in. Boy meets mysterious girl in the first dungeon. Boy's quest for revenge gradually transforms into saving the world from some over-the-top villainous threat connected to the mysterious girl. You know the drill. Oh, but it does have a char, so it's not completely devoid of Gundam tropes at least. Really, like a lot of RPGs that fall short of greatness, the biggest flaw in the game's plotting is forgetting to place quality before quantity. The first half or so is pretty alright. A little barren and generic. There's not much depth to the characters, nuance to the events, or really anything to make you think much. But it at least feels like some basic things continue to happen. But then once you get to America, things slow down into a lot of objectives that just feel like checking things off a list. Go to these 2 areas as part of getting the Zeta Gundam, then go to these 4 fortresses and fight the bosses to be able to go and attack the enemy base. Then once you've done that, there's like 2 more areas with very little plot, and then you're going to the final mega dungeon, which, okay, that part is pretty awesome since it's nice to be somewhere new, but this mega dungeon also is significantly more tedious than what came before. The endgame is also where things open up a little more, and it's fun to finally be given some freedom, but at this point they start recycling bosses a lot, and also it's kind of weird that pretty much all of the game's side content is saved towards late in the game, which in most RPGs is usually the point where I'm least interested in doing the side quests and just want to focus on the main story so that I can get this done before I burn out. So yeah, the side content is not great. On another note, while the art style of the game is mostly a mixed bag, with pretty basic backgrounds and character designs that are eccentric to say the least, the mobile suits themselves, the most important part of MS Saga, they look pretty nice. The art style is not quite SD Gundam, and in fact it sort of reminds me of the cross-silhouette Gunpla released over a decade after the game, with their longer limbs that look more like a mix of standard and SD Gundams. And while the combat animations aren't great, I do like that if you walk slowly you get a proper mobile suit walking animation, and plus the mobile suits in general are quite nicely detailed. The game even makes sure to include areas where you can see your mobile suit from the outside and appreciate the scale of it. As mentioned earlier, the game mostly focuses on Universal Century, predominantly original series Zeta and Double Zeta. Other Universal Century stuff, such as 8th MS Team, 0080, Char's Counterattack, and F91, get small nods with a couple of weapons, maybe a mobile suit if they're lucky. And then we have the oddly chosen non-Universal Century series. Wing and G, probably the series at the time that would least fit with Universal Century stuff. While they don't quite get the prominence of the 3 main series represented, they do get more representation than the other Universal Century outside of those big 3. And interestingly, when G Gundam stuff shows up, the Devil Gundam and Death Army use their uncensored names, not the censored Dark Gundam and Dark Army names they used in the dub, so that's probably neat for the mid-aughts, I guess. And admittedly, while I do complain a bit about how they fit in, the choice of series does make some sense. Gundam X, while my personal favorite alternate timeline Gundam, was pretty niche at the time after its run got cut short. Turn A Gundam would probably be too on the nose with how similar its plot is to this game's. And Gundam Seed, I don't know, maybe they held off because Seed Destiny was still airing when the game released in Japan. Actually, going back to Turn A for a second, the Wikipedia page for this game has an unsourced and weirdly formatted claim that the game originally started as a sequel to Turn A. If I can find a source on this, I'll edit this part. But if I don't, well, maybe someone with better knowledge of how to find this sort of information in Japanese on obscure media might be able to dig something up. Consider that a side quest from me to you. I don't know, if you find something credible, I'll pin the comment or something. I will also mention that among the various custom mobile suits that are filling in random encounters, there are also a few little Universal Century deep cuts slipped in there, like the Heavy Goof or the Gym Light Armor. They're cute additions that, if you're not as familiar with Gundam, could easily be mistaken for more original designs that are the result of simply mashing together an existing mobile suit and an RPG mechanic. But no, some of these are just regular mobile suits that exist in the main UC timeline. Unfortunately, this does mostly stay in the early game, but that's more a symptom of how disproportionately many works are set in the 1 Year War, and the resulting fact that 1 Year War mobile suits all have about 1 million variants. And with all the unicorn symbolism, with the unicorns being a major benevolent organization that helps the protagonists out, you might be expecting the game to be building up to a certain full Psycho Frame Gundam, but alas, the game was released in 2005 in Japan, 2006 in America, and it was only in 2006 in Japan we would see the start of the original novel version of Gundam Unicorn. And lastly, for this general grab bag section, well, there's just a lot of little things that feel unpolished and full of small annoyances. The sort of things that don't really matter individually, but in aggregate just make the game feel rough. Like how when resting at an inn, you can pay the base fee to restore your character's TP, or 3 times that to repair your mobile suit too, except that there are techniques that can spend TP to heal your suits. So the more expensive option really only saves you a few menu clicks, and even if you are out of TP, it would be better to rest once to restore it, repair your mobile suits with techniques, then rest for TP again. I mean, it doesn't matter later on, but in the early game you're desperately trying to save any coin, and it's just kind of weirdly not thought all the way through. It also bugs me that it feels like there should be TP restoration at save points. Not being able to restore it without using an item or going back to town feels notably more old-fashioned than the rest of the game's design should indicate. The game isn't hardcore enough for it to feel like a well-thought-out choice, and, well, the potential return to town that it creates just makes the game more tedious, not necessarily more challenging. There's the way the game doesn't save your party formation to restore after battles, so if you've tagged out one of your units, which is something that will happen almost every battle that takes more than 1 turn later on, you're going to have to open up the menu and switch them back afterwards. Every single time. Then there's the small annoyance of how every major city seems to have this little entryway screen just to make you walk a little further. This really shouldn't bother me, but this game already has so much walking. There's this system with locked chests that can only be opened with special tools that are in fixed supply until the end game. These really bug me because there's not much of an informed decision here, and the game kind of baits you by giving you enough to get every chest in the early game, and then suddenly the supply dries up. Honestly, this kind of weird, uninformed decisions around the gear you get is just an old RPG cliche that I am glad has largely gone to the wayside. At least it's not that weird thing some games do where you can get better items if you don't open a chest until later. But in practice it is kind of close to that. And lastly, as is common with older RPGs, get a game over and you have to load your last save. Not normally something I'm bothered by, especially since the game is rarely too hard. But look, if you've sat through this whole review, you've noticed the theme. Tedium. Someone's gonna make a smart-ass joke in the comments about this video being the thing that's tedious. But tedium is the biggest issue with this game, and so having to redo even a section of it because you got sent back to your last save, it just really grates on me. It's all these rough edges that make the game fit the negative image of an old game that some players might have. As someone who is quite into older games, I know that not all old games, or even old RPGs, have these kinds of rough edges, but MS Saga is the type of game that gives people that impression. This game is difficult to talk about, which might be shocking to hear considering how long I've been talking about it. It's got some very cool and interesting systems, but it misses the mark in other key areas. And that kind of split always makes a game hard to discuss. Unfortunately, those areas where it misses the mark are the story and exploration. These are the parts of RPGs that are supposed to be the connective tissue that carry you through the game, providing motivation even when things get a little drawn out. But much to the contrary, this game piles on the tedium with such an unrelenting number of fights that even the great battle system can wear out its welcome at times. And when the relentless onslaught of mandatory fights or a bad difficulty spike suck the fun out of combat, then the weak connective tissue leaves you wondering why you're continuing to play. The game's high points are really great, but it's just uneven and padded out, and as you get further into the game, this, combined with the weaker progression in the later parts of the game, causes things to really drag. While I remembered the good parts at least when I started this project, I had forgotten how rough the bad parts were. This feels like it could have been the rough first try of a series of games that would have been great, but it came out right before the game industry stopped being quite so generous with second chances. Not to mention being a Japanese RPG with a lot of the flaws people commonly associate with the genre during a time when Japanese RPGs were starting to fall out of fashion quite hard. And plus, I just can't imagine being a pretty late PS2 title helped it much. The problems the game has absolutely can be fixed, and in fact the big issues, the exploration and the story, have set such a low bar in this game that they'd be really easy to improve upon for a sequel. But, unfortunately, a 20-year-old obscure PS2 Japanese RPG based on a franchise that has had much more success with other games, yeah, there is no way this is getting a sequel, especially in this era where games that are part of a larger media franchise tend to play things extremely safe and just cram the series into a mold to fit a more popular format. It's a shame, but perhaps some other game in the future, whether Gundam or some indie game, can take inspiration from its ideas. But I digress, I'm just fantasizing here. It's just such a pain to try and sell this because of how drastically varied the quality can be. High highs and low lows, as it were. If you want to give it a try, I'd suggest playing until you reach America. If you haven't fallen in love with the game by then, well, it's not going to get better, so you might be better off dropping it. And I do recommend trying it so long as you have a bit of patience to deal with some of the usual RPG annoyances. I just struggle to suggest you finish it unless you fall in love with it. I don't know, this comes down to like philosophy of how you approach games and stuff. I don't really see this as a waste so long as you enjoy the time you spend with it, and don't play too much longer after the point where it stops being fun. But others may value completing the game more highly. The game is full of interesting ideas that I haven't seen elsewhere, and executes well on the concept of being a mecha-focused RPG outside of the tactics subgenre that you see plenty of. So maybe this wasn't as positive as I was hoping it would be when I started working on this video, but I was glad to go back to it and come to a final conclusion about it, and to share this little game with all of you. So now over to you. Have you played Gundam True Odyssey? Do you like it, or did the flaws drag it down too much for you? If you haven't played it, are you interested in trying it, or does it just sound to you like the flaws aren't worth putting up with? Let me know in the comments below, and for now, this is Mikhail, signing off.